new things. I noticed last night, for example, that the headline in the New York Times, when the first installment of the Pentagon Papers was published, the headline was Vietnam Archive. I hadn't noticed that phrase archive right there so prominent before. I had forgotten that first the New York Times published an excerpt because they thought it was their civic responsibility as a non-failing news organization, and that they were shut down, right? But then the Washington Post picked it up, and then they published an excerpt. And then they were shut down. And then the Boston Globe published an excerpt, and they were shut down. And there were 17 different newspapers in succession, one after the other, before Mike Raveley read the Pentagon Papers into the public record, and they were publicly available. And so I don't know, I was just profoundly impacted and reminded about the courage and the sense of duty and professionalism among media and of Dan. So Dan was going to be here this morning at 10:25. He called me yesterday. He's sick. He was going to Zoom in. That's not happening. So he's really sick. Just got off the phone with him, but he wishes that he could be here. And so our loss. I'm going to suggest 2 or 3 things. The first thing is that for anyone who didn't watch the movie last night, go watch it. It's a little hard to get. Contact me, and I'll make sure we can figure out a way for you to get it. It's going to be back online. It's not online right now publicly via Netflix. The second thing is he's coming out with a new book. The title of the book is The Doomsday Machine: Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner. And it's a very important and relevant book. I've almost finished reading it. It's going to be published in a few weeks. It's a book that has been 40 years in the making. He claims he's been working on it for 40 years, and so maybe he's had a little bit of writer's block along the way. But regardless, it's a story of a second set of papers. The first set of papers were the Pentagon Papers about the Vietnam War, but a second set of papers that has to do with nuclear war planning. That he was intimately involved in ways that, even though I've known him for a long time and knew a lot of his story, I didn't realize the depth of his involvement in some of those issues back in the 60s. So I'm going to just put a plug in for the book when it comes out. I'm sure that we'll all be reading about it in various ways. And especially now, because the book addresses an issue of critical importance that has to do with the command, the delegation authority for the use of nuclear weapons. And there's hearings were held on that very subject this week in Washington relative to our current president and concerns that some people have about the delegation authority and his authority for the use of nuclear weapons. So, these issues 50 years ago, they're ever more so important now. And then finally, I thought that during the time that we had allocated for him, we could do a couple of things. One thing is Roger, who's about to go on here. Roger could go a little longer. That'd be cool. Great, thank you. And the second thing is we haven't had really a lot of conversation among ourselves, at least at the group level. We have out in the foyer, etc. So, excuse me. I thought it might be useful if we maybe had some conversation about some of the issues that have been that we've been raising here, and maybe some of the burning questions or ideas that you might have had that you want to share with other people. Because, like I said, for me at least, this whole 2 days is a story about collaboration, what we've done individually, what we can do collectively, how we can help each other and build on each other's work for our mutual benefit. So that's a suggestion, and for those who want to participate, we'll continue that right here after Roger finishes. So just want to say just a couple words of introduction to Roger's work, Roger McDonald, in the context of the Internet Archive. As Brewster said, universal access to all knowledge. That's the kind of big goal. Then we break it down to like individual pieces of things that we can actually do and try to do well. And we break that down by media type. And television news in particular is a key media type. And not to steal any of Roger's thunder, I just want to say one thing about this is for me at least, it becomes ever more so like, oh, I get it. No, now I really get it. Like the way we have, for decades as Americans, come to understand what's true and important in this world has traditionally been through the lens of the television, and in particular television news. Far less so now in the age of Facebook, but still video and television news is critically important in how many people are getting their sense of what is true and real and important. And it's almost completely ephemeral, right? I mean, unless you have a photographic memory, it's there and then it goes away. And you can't go back and check the record. You do VHS, etc., but like no one does that. And the second thing is, you can only kind of do one thing at a time, right? I'm watching this or I'm watching that or this. And so, but it's really the totality of all of this information that we're getting as a society that is shaping our society overall. And now in an age of like, hyper polarization, these different messages, these different channels, understanding them all can only be done in the context of all of them. And that requires something. It requires access to them in a way that they can be analyzed. It requires that they be thought of, treated, and manipulated and used like data. So this idea of video as data, I think, is critically important. So that's it. Roger, you're going to fill us all in on what all that means to your work here at the archive, and a pleasure to introduce you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's water here for you.
Thanks. Good morning. I'm Roger McDonald. I direct the television archive here at the Internet Archive. And good morning. I'm Roger McDonald. I direct the television archive here at the Internet Archive. And I'm joined on stage by Will, who's a graduate student at Stanford, who's working a lot with our corpus to really break it open. And I'll present a little bit about what we're up to and then toss it to Will. As Mark said, one of the fundamental principles here is that we treat all our media as data. It's all a little bit spinning around. And when you think of it in that fashion, it offers a doorway to uncommon discovery and analysis by machines serving us. We have the television archive and an archive of U.S. television news that uses this low-hanging fruit of metadata of closed captioning, so that you can search 1 million+ hours of recent U.S. television news by the captioning. Now, the captioning is not superb. Captioning is one of the last requirements of television to serve those with hearing disabilities, and they don't do such a good job. But it's a start. And what we're trying to do here at the archive is kind of spur the imaginations and spark some interesting innovation on top of this notion of treating media as data and opening this up. It's been particularly compelling to archivists who have felt that their content is otherwise constrained by certain access or rights issues. And the notion of being able to hold those videos intact in the archives, but do deep indexing so that you can know exactly who's talking, when they're talking, about which they're talking, where they're talking. All those rich metadata we're on the threshold of being able to derive and expose to the world for humans and machines to understand at an unprecedented scale. So at the archive, we're welcoming people to come into our archive and build on top of it. In the last few years, we've been working closely with journalists and scholars, particularly in the domain of politics, and trying to discern the reality of those things that are asserted in television by both within advertising and non-advertising. And we have learned that we've learned ways that we can serve them, and we were trying to do a better job. And I'll just give you a couple brief examples of what we're up to. But this is the U.S. television archive mostly, although we're now including BBC News, Deutsche Welle, and Al Jazeera English, but we really want to do a better job of collecting thoughtfully the world's television. So we're beginning to expand and seek the wise counsel of those who would let us know what's the best of TV around the world that should be preserved. And then we can look at how we can apply these new techniques of access, these transformative techniques that allow rich metadata to let people and machines understand it better. And we're looking to apply that to some of the best world's television. Here's the open interface of the TV News Archive. I thought I'd just look at Roy Moore, who's in the news a lot. We have some 1,613 individual news programs that have a mention of him. You can see the spike in recent mentions of him. This is presented in, we'll just take a look at one of these episodes. Now our search engine will try to get people right to the point. In this case, since it often is at the beginning of the program, because this is one of the lead stories, if it was not quite the lead stories, it would take you deeper into the program. We present this in 1 minute increments so that you can explore and you can dive in.
Dating the 32-year-old district attorney.
And listen to that which is being said.
Gloria was an 18-year-old cheerleader when Roy Moore began taking her.
Using this to compare and contrast a variety of different kind of coverage. You can also share and define exact in and out points that will help illustrate your point.
Lee Corfman. Roy Moore wants you to believe
adjusting the in
account.
point, and here's me adjusting the out point. Once again, our interface, there is no TV search engine, so we're still trying to wing it and to convey to people. In this case, they're using words to understand where you are. And if you wanted to, you could put this URL as a permanent link anywhere, and it would always refer back to that quote, or you could tweet it. And I just did that as an arbitrary thing. And here is that
Lee Corfman.
That quote.
Roy Moore wants you to believe the account.
But most importantly,
of the 17-year-old girl dating the.
This has a couple key features. One, it has detailed information on from whence this came. What's the network? What's the date?
Lee Corfman. Roy Moore wants
it
you
always
to
has
believe
link
the
backs
account
to the context
of the 17-year-old
that
girl
in the archive,
dating the 32-year-old.
so that you can see, well, wait a minute, was that a fair quote? Or did they just say, I would never say, I hate dogs, and somebody just trimmed out the I hate dogs. We worked a lot with the fact-check communities, and we are now looking at how we can integrate context into television and how you would display and integrate assertions of fact. And I'll just pick, let's take whatever's here. So here's an episode of Fox and Friends. It's gone to a point where we've put a little icon here to flag the attention, just as a kind of a test at how would you flag people's attention that there's something here that has been evaluated. Here's the quote.
Thomas Jefferson said, "Government that governs least governs best." I mean, the question that people ought to ask is, who do you think will be more responsible?
So maybe this is a fact check of the Jefferson, and it's been done by PolitiFact. And here he goes. Here's their assessment of his quote of Jefferson. In the background, we're looking to publish metadata for search engines, structured metadata that lets them know, here's our fact check at this point in this video. It is done by, in this case, PolitiFact. It is regarding an assertion by Mike Pence, and this is the way this is their evaluation. These captions have been used by a lot by journalists. Here's a recent story about the differential coverage of Russia stories and where they associated with Trump potential collusion or Clinton's potential engagement with this Uranium One deal. So they used our captioning to dive into that. I won't go deeper in what they derived. Just want to show you what they did. Last year, we opened up collections of TV throughout the United States to take a look at political ads. We used audio fingerprinting to identify political ads and joined these political ads with professional journalism fact-checking and pumped them out as data. This audio fingerprinting was also used by the New York Times and a bunch of other folks to look at when a debate happened or some other key thing in subsequent television news. When were those sound bites used, and what sound bites were chosen? If you never saw a debate or a State of the Union or somebody's testimony from Congress and only relied on television news, what would you have seen? And would there be a differential across networks? And here the Times did a wonderful data visualization piece. The yellow arrow going from left to right is looking at different portions of the State of the Union message. We're also doing OCR on the lower thirds. These are these chyrons that sometimes identify who's talking, but also contain editorial content. And we're pumping this out as data. And here it is live that 35 seconds ago. The CNN published this, MSNBC did this, Fox News did this, and seconds ago, the BBC News live from London said that. Vox, in this case, has used these to look at the differential coverage of how Fox News covered the Puerto Rican hurricanes. In this case, the New York Times did a study of Fox and Friends using these data. Here, these are chyrons. They also did identification of ads. Here are ads. This is on the first 2 hours of when the indictments came down on Manafort and his colleague, as well as the other guy pleading guilty, Papadopoulos. Noting a differential in how things were reported. And one last thing we're doing ethically minded, thoughtful for what the unintended consequences could be of facial recognition in TV news. We pump out these data. In this case here, Paul Ryan has been detected for 6 seconds at this point. Just to take a look at
lingering concerns by some.
And there's the face of Paul Ryan. This is all working towards the convergence point where machine learning and other statistical methods can be used to use all these varieties of signals to finally crack the code of video and allow us to know exactly who's talking about what and where they are and at some considerable scale. When that happens, and we think it's in the not too distant future, we'll be able to understand the ebb and flow of thoughts and attempts to persuade at considerable scale. So with that, I'm going to pass this over to Will. He's a doctoral student at Stanford who's been working with our content and has done some pretty remarkable stuff. Will.
Thanks, Roger. HDMI? I think, oh, does it have to display port? Yeah, I need that.
Members of the party, top GOP.
Well, two things. First of all, you in the back,
Okay.
forward. And you in the front, speak to the people in the back.
Can everyone hear me? Excellent. Are we going to show up on screen? Perfect. All right. So, hi everyone. As Roger introduced, my name is Will Creighton, and I'm really excited to show you a demo, a very rough demo, so bear with me, but a demo nonetheless, of the tool that I've been building now for a couple months called Esper. So the core problem that we were trying to tackle, we being me as well, and Roger as well as some of the collaborators that I have at Stanford, is most search on videos, like when you want to ask questions about videos or figure out what contents that they contain, is primarily oriented towards text. Now, if you think about the traditional video search interfaces that you've probably used, like say YouTube, if you type something into the YouTube search bar, the results that they return are primarily oriented based on the title of the video, what's in the captions, or sorry, by captions I mean like the subtext or maybe even the comments, but rarely is any of the search actually based on the content of the video. You can't say, show me all of the YouTube videos that contain a news clip with a woman standing next to a man and the man's talking over the woman or something. Those sorts of situational-based queries, unless they're explicitly labeled, are not something you're going to be able to access easily. And the problem with that is that even though YouTube is a lot of smart engineers working there, it's a fundamentally hard problem to understand what's happening inside of the pixels of our video. Extracting a higher level semantics from the raw pixels is a fundamental issue that's been slowly addressed within the research community over the last couple decades. And now that the tools have gotten a little bit better, we're starting to see that it's possible now to write search tools that use not just this metadata, like what the title says or what people have written about this video, but instead to actually search through the videos and start to analyze them based on their contents. And you saw a nicer, polished version of this in some of what Roger had. So they started looking at the captions, which already is pretty innovative because most other tools won't do that for you. Also because captions aren't usually available for videos. But on top of that, they started to look at, for example, identifying faces within videos. And I think that's one portion of the broader set of things we're trying to capture within Esper. So again, broadly, what the point of this tool is, it's a tool for data analysts to explore large video collections based on their contents. You're assuming that nobody has ever looked at all these videos or certainly labeled all of them, but instead it's up to you to do that. And we use automated tools and algorithms to process these videos and extract some metadata. So I'll go through a little bit of a live demo just to show you some examples. So within this interface, what I did is I took 100 hours of video from the Internet Archive TV News data set. This is 50 hours from CNN and 50 hours from Fox surrounding, I think, the 2016 election cycle. And through this interface, you can start to explore the different parts of your video data. So for starters, you might say, all right, let me just see every video inside of my data set. So this visualization shows you a thumbnail per video, where the thumbnail is the first frame inside of the video. And you can see, oh, that's Jake Tapper, that's probably CNN. We can play that video really quickly, assuming the bandwidth is reasonable, bump it open, and then watch through. This is an hour, 10-minute segment, so we obviously don't have that much time. But if you wanted to look through the individual videos, you're really curious about Ken Bone, you want to reminisce about the 2016 debates, then you could always throw back to that point. But assuming you want to ask some more interesting questions, you can start to filter these things down based on both the pixel metadata as well as other kinds of metadata you can extract. Like for example, we know these videos are Fox or CNN, so we could say, all right, let me just see all the videos that are from Fox. We can see there's a very consistent color scheme, all that dark blue in the background. And one thing to note here is when I say we're running these queries, this is not a traditional search interface in the sense of this is built for programmers, and subsequently, although I'm clicking buttons to sort of run the queries super quickly, you can see up in the search bar at the very top that these are actually written in a programming language called Python. So this is a tool designed not really for general consumption, but more so for the hacking data analyst, someone who has the capacity to understand programming and subsequently can more efficiently specify these complex queries. So to give you an example of how complex this can get, let's say we want to start diving into some more interesting analyses. So one thing we did on this data set was we ran a face detector that extracted as much as it could all of the faces out of each frame of these videos. So we could say, show me the faces that you detected inside of this data set. So the thing that's drawn here is each thumbnail now represents not a video, but instead a sort of face track, a single face tracked over time, or a few faces tracked over time. So this is a clip of Jake Tapper. We can see, if we zoom in a little bit, that clip is going to be 14.5 seconds long. Here's Ruben Marchio for a second and a half and stuff like that. So we don't get much out of this in terms of, this is more so just showing us that our face detector worked, and we can see the bounding boxes drawn to understand that, yes, we're correctly detecting faces. But it gets more interesting once we start adding more, once we start combining this metadata that we extracted plus some of the other kinds of metadata like the show and time. So we could say, all right, now I want to find all the faces that are on a particular show. So in this case, one show in CNN is CNN Newsroom with Poppy Harlow. So I can say, show me all the faces that just occurred on that show. And so we can see most of these are going to be Poppy Harlow, some from random commercials, some from interviews and stuff like that. But we can keep making it increasingly complex. I might want to say next, okay, I don't just want to see faces, I want to see faces specifically of women. So one thing that we also did in this data set is for each face, we ran an algorithm that estimated whether that face was a woman or a man. And subsequently, we can use that to ask, okay, try to guess where all the women are inside of this show. And then we get the faces just of Poppy Harlow, Hillary Clinton, not this random dude, stuff like that. And again, we can keep sort of refining that query. Instead of seeing the female faces, I want to see 2 female faces in a single show where each face is sufficiently large. Because let's say I wanted to identify panels that had at least 2 women on them. Then I could write a query that says, show me those panels that have at least 2 women where their heads are a third of the frame, and the detector says they're a woman, and I identify they're a box. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, but the point is these queries can get complex. Expressing situations like this of CNN panels with at least 2 women is not something you're going to easily do within an existing query tool, but the language that we have allows you to describe these queries, and then our system can show you the results back inside of this interface. One cool thing is this doesn't just deal with bounding boxes. If you want to use other kinds of metadata, for example, one piece of metadata that we've been dealing with is poses, which is you get a full skeleton of the person inside the frame as well as where their hands are, and sometimes a little bit of information about the face. So this particular query is going to show you a bunch of frames where we detected a skeleton, and specifically, I think the filter here is we just wanted to see the filter here is we wanted to see if their hands were above their head. Now, sometimes it gets a little bit slow. Actually, I think I will need to shut down my server because sometimes it is a little bit too slow. This is live hacking for you guys. Give me 2 seconds. Oh wait, that worked. So in this case, what this query did is it said, show me a frame where I found that somebody had 2 hands above their head, and we can see inside of this frame, it identified this person in some random commercial who was like, yeah, the query returned the correct thing. I feel just like this guy. And let me bring this back up. We can see a broader variety of pose data if we want to get a better sense of just what exists in the rest of this data set. Zoom back out a little bit. So the cool thing here is there's a lot of evolving computer vision tools to find things not just like faces, but more rich data like poses. And you could start to use this to ask more interesting questions. If you wanted to identify who's sitting down, or what posture do people have when they're on panels, could you identify if somebody's slouching or if they're sitting very imposing? You could identify if somebody's smiling or if somebody's frowning, and then start to use that data. So here's a broader context of some more just sets of examples. So for example, in this frame, you can see it identifies the 2 people sitting down, and you could tell from the curvature of the knees, from the skeleton, if you wanted to identify, say, these sorts of fireside chats versus the full frontal interviews on TV news and stuff like that, or if you wanted to identify, I guess, people standing at the G20 or something. All kinds of interesting metadata you could extract from this. But one point I want you to take away from here is, like, this tool makes it really easy to get these higher level pieces of data out of your videos and then organize them and visualize them. But the thing that we're really interested right now, and part of the reason I'm talking to y'all, is we're trying to understand what questions people want to ask based on this data. So if you had a database of all of the poses of every person inside the entirety of 1 million hours of TV news, what would you ask? What questions would be relevant? I mean, I'll go through a few more of my ideas, but I would ask you to think about that a little bit, because if you'd be interested in using this tool or asking questions about this data set, definitely come talk to me. That's what I'm here for. Let's see, is there anything else I wanted to mention from here? No, I think that's basically it. So this is the brief demo of Esper. It just shows you that you can express these complex situations on top of all kinds of interesting pixel-based metadata, like bounding boxes and poses. And one other thing to mention is that oftentimes you don't just want to see sort of these frames, but you also want to generate more statistical insights. So this is hooked up into a programming environment. The dangers of live demos. Great. And because this is a tool intended for developers, it's really easy to drop down from this visualization into a different environment that's more comfortable for people who are used to traditional data analytics. So you don't have to know Python to really understand what's going on here, although if you do, it might make more sense. So in this case, previously I was running my queries to generate this visualization of draw my stuff on top of frames, but I also might just want to get some raw statistics or graphs that correspond to the metadata I extracted inside of my database. So here, I run a query just based on some simple Python code that says, across the entirety of my data set, count the number of male and female faces that I ran into. So in this case, we found 560,000 male faces, 400,000 female faces, and 512 unidentifiable faces. And this gives you an initial indication of, like, whoa, there might be gender bias in the media? Crazy. But I mean, the more interesting thing here would be to start to drill down, right? You could use the same tool to say, all right, let's break this down by show. How does this differ based on, you know, presumably Poppy Harlow probably has more women than, say, Brett Baier does, based on either the host or the kinds of guests they have. And those are the sorts of analyses we're really trying to dig into. And so you have this combination of these statistical-based insights that you'll generate through traditional programmatic interfaces, as well as these more visual-based insights by looking at the data, seeing these situations that you're querying for, and then answering whatever questions that you have through the combination of these two. And I think that's all I want to say about Esper. So thank you very much.
Happy to entertain any questions. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
It's most amazing. In addition to gender, I wonder if you can scan for race by the people on the screens. Particularly, I'm thinking the way that community groups and sociologists have long been interested in having traffic stops recorded by race. Have always resisted that, but when it's been done, it shows that African Americans and Latinos, et cetera, are much more likely to be stopped. But expanding it to media studies, the way in which, who gets to be on TV, which can be both good or bad, I wonder if you can do that.
I'm going to jump to you, but first allow me to say, because this brings up something that we think of as ethical considerations. In this domain of AI, machine learning, large-scale statistics, we've had some recent examples where people have enthusiastically gone forward and not thought about the unintended consequences, some of which have rocked our republic. In the case of racial identification, there's been some horrible fails last year where Google started to run that, and that is both it bespeaks a not terribly thoughtful assessment of what they were publishing and its potential consequences, but in that larger scale, being an environment, a research environment where there's people around whose job it is to go, what could go wrong?
Yeah, and just to add to that, as someone who's been a little bit steeped in the literature, I've seen some pretty horrifying things. There was a paper out of a Chinese university last year that attempted to identify whether somebody was a criminal based in their face, Minority Report, and then there was actually a paper out of Stanford just a few months ago that attempted to identify whether somebody was homosexual based in their face. Not good ideas, right? But people still do these things. And so I 100% agree that I think there's a strong ethical consideration. Particularly, one point I wanted to mention earlier was that one thing through both Roger's tool as well as this tool that we'll start to be able to do is identify people. And right now, the tool that we have is open source, but we're not exposing the data that we've generated publicly. So there's a lot of ethical considerations around if you could identify every single person inside of a news data set. Should you do that? And the better question is, should that data be released publicly? Like, I think I would want to release some version of the tool that I built to the public, but I wouldn't want to release that version where you could find an arbitrary person, particularly if that wasn't like, say, one of the main, if they were just happen to be in the background of one of these shots. You don't want to capture those kinds of people and then sort of have them be indexable by basically anyone. I think there's strong privacy concerns that we need to consider. But, and in terms of detecting race, I think gender is sort of the same issue. Like, obviously gender fluidity is a problem. I mean, gender is not binary, so we have this like male-female detector, but that doesn't really reflect the true nature of what gender is. So we have these nice proxies, and I think they're still important to answer these more interesting societal issues. However, it's important that when we run these tools to understand that, like, can a racial detector understand if someone is biracial, or can they understand based on someone's skin color, you know, whether they are or not? Like, I think the fact that it's a hard question doesn't mean we necessarily shouldn't do it, because we can still get interesting insights that can move forward the discussion. However, that discussion has to be metered by our understanding of the limitations of the tools.
And just to let you know, our facial recognition that we're running right now against television news is just focused on current and former presidents in the House and Senate leadership.
So I'm trying to get an appreciation of the universe of parameters that you've already, made available to a Python person, and so it seems like you have bounding boxes and you have poses, and the taxonomies that you. So the male-female with the bounding box, and maybe sitting, standing with the things. I assume you can map that to length of time on screen. Is it also mapped to the words in the captioning? And are you getting any closer to distinguishing host and guest? Wow. And what about inside and outside, and kind of a vox pop? This is in the field, this is in the studio. You're getting any closer to anything like that?
Okay, laundry list, rapid fire. So for associating with text, we actually haven't done as much as Roger's tool has for including captions in the data. We focus primarily in the pixels, but that's a very near-term goal for us. We want to be able to search concurrently in both the bounding boxes and the text. For example, you might want to say, identify segments based on what topic they're about using the text. I know the segment is about immigration. And then finding the immigration segments and ask some visual question about it, like what imagery is most commonly associated with immigration. So we're definitely interested in those kinds of questions, and we're getting toward that direction. You can represent hierarchies within this data schema. I can tell you a lot more that most of you aren't going to be excited about in terms of how the data is represented, but you can understand things like what time of the show, also what time of day these things come from, and we're slowly getting to a better understanding of things like, is it inside or outside of the studio? But those are slightly harder because there aren't like off-the-shelf tools that'll tell you, is this inside CNN or is this not inside CNN? Like there's a broad technical problem of having these sort of domain-specific analyzers that we're still trying to evolve better solutions for.
How about show guests? It seems like you could do that just by the frequency, the host guest. It seems like the host is going to be more frequently on camera,
right.
over course of time, and you can get to that, or
yeah. In terms of identifying persons, we are pretty close to being pretty good at that, but we haven't. Right now, we've been primarily dealing with sort of anonymized bounding boxes.
I was working with some students about distinguishing commentary and news, which you can label in text, but television news has been very fuzzy, especially lately, especially the ones you're looking at. But with some artificial intelligence, you think it'd be possible, and some rules about what news or commentary is, you could apply it to this, and kind of maybe, if I only want to see news versus commentary and opinion, Does that sound possible to you?
I think I think based on the captions, you could probably identify a lot of these things about whether this is a news segment, whether it's a panel segment, and so on. I'm not an expert in natural language. I think that's one reason why we haven't addressed much of the in-depth analysis in the captions yet. Most of my experience is in computer vision, processing the actual pixels. But I think definitely that's something we're interested in, is getting these higher level understandings of like what these segments are about. Can we categorize these segments as being overly politicized? Well, I mean, that might be a little hard to determine, but is this commentary, stuff like that? That's definitely, we're going in that direction, but it requires a deeper understanding, I think, of specifically the text that we don't quite have yet.
My question has to do with the captions that Roger showed with the TV news archive. Are they able to be corrected? And the other question I have is, can they be included in the quotes? So when you tweet a quote, would it not just link to that video, but would it also include the caption? Thanks.
Second question first. When the embed appears, it doesn't appear with the captioning, but when you click through to the source, it does appear with the captioning. And then can captions be corrected? We'd love to see captions be corrected. It's feasible to do that with some natural language processing and spell checking, for goodness sakes. But where they didn't occur to begin with, these are all human driven. The television captions are almost always, for live captioning, live news, are almost always human created. They could pay humans better wages to do a better job, and heck, they could also run dynamic spell checking. We have that in our lives. But I want to call out Karen from WGBH and the American Archive of Public Television, who's going to be following us, who's developed this really cool tool that they're doing for correcting captioning, for correcting the transcripts that are machine created. So this joining of natural language processing folks, text folks, archivists who have all this content, some of which have just primitive metadata, machine learning folks, computer science folks, we're on this threshold where when we're talking to one another and understanding each other's needs, this co-creation, co-development can finally crack open this media set for deep understanding. Yes, sir.
Yes, I have a query about the 512 unidentified on the male-female census there. I was wondering, would there be a way to have humans look at the 512, make a determination, use that data to teach the system itself to be smarter the next time it goes around and reduce the number by machine?
Yes, excellent observation. 100% agree. That strikes at the heart of a broader issue, which is one thing I didn't talk about today is accuracy. So one big question you deal with these data sets is, for example, you'll run a face detector and you'll ask, like, did it detect all the faces? You can't technically know unless you watch all of the video, but that's infeasible. So one open problem, particularly in data analytics of this scale, is how can you validate a data set? How can you estimate how accurate your tools are when you run them on data that nobody's ever seen before? And so one approach to this is with labeling, and that's one thing that we've been slowly integrating into the tool, is that you can say, show me for gender, it's kind of, it's easy in the sense of it tells you if it's unidentified or if it doesn't know what the gender is. It's harder for the face case because it doesn't tell you when it misses a face, if that makes sense. But at least for the gender case, yes, I think absolutely there's both a component of you should label these things to know when you got them wrong and have a human look at them, and then additionally go back and retrain your algorithm so it's smarter the next time. And broadly, there's a theme of the tool that we've been trying to emerge, which is how can you optimize the human in the loop? Like, you're never going to get rid of the human in the process of data analytics. They have to drive the questions, they have to interpret the results, but we can prioritize their attention and make it more efficient for them to look at this data rather than having to scrub through videos or things like that sort of manually. So I think that's a concern, and that's definitely part of our sort of ideological framework underpinning how we develop this tool.
So I think it's absolutely fabulous. As you're doing the image searching, can you extract it as data that you could then put it back into the metadata record for the archive, so that then the web search engines that use text could then search on that data?
Yeah, absolutely. Already, all the metadata we store is stored in a database in the cloud. So it would be, in fact, it would be relatively easy. If for example, the demo I showed you today, it would be flip a switch and anybody could search it if I wanted to. So it's pretty easy for us to both package up this metadata and give it off to somebody else if we think they need it to search their own videos.
Hi. So, two things. First of all, one, so Roger, you've been archiving like 60 television news channels 24/7 for like 8+ years here at the archive. What's next in terms of archiving more of what's available via television news? That's number one. Number two is, so I'm envious. I want more people like Will. So, you know, I just want to, almost everything that we archive here, make available, is not just available via web interfaces for the general public, but are also available via APIs. And the APIs are public, and they're available, the documentation and support, et cetera. So, you know, we're always looking for people to work with us and to take the resources. Once again, as I mentioned yesterday, the resources that are not our resources, they're like other people's resources that we've been collecting and making available to the general public and through APIs for people to get more value from. Just curious as to, like, what are you looking for? Like, how can other people help you? How can any of us here help you? If you had your wish, in addition to more people like Will, what are some of those projects maybe that you might think, oh, it'd be cool if someone did this with the content? Yeah.
I'm going to have Will answer that question first, and I'll follow him up. And we should make this the last question, unless because Karen, who asked the question before, we're going to be swapping mics right away. But Will, the question is, how much do you want to know what people want to know?
Well, everything. I mean, the short answer is that really, the things we don't lack right now, we don't lack that. We have plenty of data, we have plenty of compute power, we have the tools and so on. But just to reiterate the point I made earlier, the thing that we're missing is the questions. Like, I am a computer scientist by training. I am not a journalist by training, or someone who's deeply steeped in sort of the political sphere beyond what I normally read in the news. So I'm deeply interested in what all of you have to say in terms of questions that you'd be interested in asking on top of the TV news data set that would use these pixels, these annotations, in order to really dive deep into some topic that you're super interested in. I don't know if there's much more specific than that. It could be on the pixels or the captions. It could be on election cycles. It could be on off years. It could be on anything you would find inside of TV news. We even use, I mean, although this is primarily about TV news, this tool that we've developed is not exclusively for TV news. We've used it for other video data sets. So if you have other kinds of video archives you're really interested in, I could happy to talk with you about those as well. Yeah.
The same answer. What we as librarians, Will as a computer scientist, you as archivists, and other diverse professions, the key thing is that we all get to talk with one another more about what we really want, because we're on this threshold of being able to address in what we might want to get. This threshold being of where machine learning is at this threshold that when you feed it enough media, and we have 1.5 million hours of recent U.S. television news with exceptional metadata about them, what do people want to do with it? That's part of been our conversations with scholars and journalists recently, but now the role of archivists and those who want to save news and other products can now be part of the conversation about what kind of questions you want to be opened up, be able to be answered by opening up metadata of all kinds of diverse sources. So when Mark was talking about asking what's the question, what's the future, for us, it is opening up much wider about what you want, how can we serve your interests, and opening up the collections much wider. So not only does the Internet Archive collect in this media set television, but make it easier for other people to do the same and share that content, either feed it directly to us or use our algorithmic approaches within their own context to open up the metadata where all can share. So we think of it as a family affair. Thank you very much for your attention, and Will, you're doing remarkable work.
while we're swapping, I just want to add one quick thing. This tool that I built is completely open source. It's on GitHub right now. You could download it and produce the exact same demo minus the data. So if you're a programmer interested in running this yourself, come talk to me.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Will. Fascinating, kind of mind-blowing for me. But I think there are going to be some very interesting uses made of the tools that you're working on there. So kind of sticking with the moving visual media, our next presenter, Karen Cariani, is the Senior Director of the WGBH Media Library and Archives. The Media Library and Archives, MLA, provides access to the WGBH collection by providing research services, rights clearances, and licensing services in addition to circulation, accessioning, and preservation activities. Karen is also the WGBH Project Director for the American Archive for Public Broadcasting in partnership with the Library of Congress. So, Karen Cariani. Did we already get you going? Are we in that?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to take you back about 20, 30 years and start with all the stuff that's not yet digital. Because to me, I need to evangelize about the fact that we still have an issue with all of the stuff that's not yet digital. So I'm going to walk you through two projects that we've been working on. One was the Boston Local TV News Project, and the other one is the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. Whoa, it's advancing on its own. That's machine learning for you, isn't it? And I actually think that preserving the analog material and putting it online is kind of what we're doing as opposed to actually preserving online news. So that's where I'm coming from with this presentation. The challenge that we have is that there's lots of stuff, which you know about. The volume of daily news every day, every year, for many, many years, these collections grow and grow and grow. And even the born digital stuff is a tsunami coming into all of our materials. So this is often what a collection looks like. This actually was the NewsHour collection. And how do you make this accessible? So it's not like opening a book. I feel like this is the soup can analogy where you don't have a label on your soup can. You can't open a book, and it's not like a book where you can open it up and tell what the content is. And you can't also take a title necessarily and go to an online catalog of books and find out what the content is. Whoa, why is it automatically doing that? So this is one of our problems. And sometimes this is all you know about it. If you're lucky, you actually do have this index card with some description of it tucked into a film can, but then you have to identify what each of the pieces are on each of the pieces of film, necessarily if it's film news. This was an index cards for the BPL collection, which was the WHDH. We had about 40,000 index cards like this. They were cross-referenced, and they had some good data, some bad data. We found ourselves lucky to have this information about all this collection. You can turn the data into this. The thing on the left is the index cards. On the right is a database that took manually transcribing the materials on the index cards into the database. Scanning it wasn't going to work. You need to be able to identify what the data is, what fields it goes into. Is this a location? Is this a person? Is this a date? Is the date in the right format? How do we standardize that? And then what do we do? Whoops, sorry. And then what do we do? So once the data is electronic, it is searchable, and you can use it to put it on the web and have it be searchable. You can find things maybe if the data is rich enough. Ideally, what we want to do is make it even richer, but people really just want to see the stuff. So we made a website. I wonder if there's a way for me to stop it from advancing, but anyway. We made a website called the Boston Local TV News. It's 4 collections: the WCVB collection, which was Channel 5 in Boston, WHDH, which was Channel 4 in Boston, WGBH's news collection, and CCTV, which is Cambridge Community Television. They were at 4 different archives. We brought them all together. In bringing them all together, we covered about 40 years of Boston local history. There were about 53,000 items in total. There isn't very much robust data at all, but we just threw it online thinking, let people come, and hopefully they will help us identify objects if they know about them, and if not, then we will just try to, over time, we will continue to improve it. So this is some of the indexing that we have. We can pull out locations and dates. The dates were not always accurate or specific. Whoops. This is how you could search, and as you can see, some of these records don't have very much data at all. We do allow for searches on items that are digitized or on items that are not digitized, so you can either just get the records of the items that have video that's connected to it, or just the data. This is frustrating for some researchers because they find like there's a lot of stuff and they can't really see what it is, but we have actually decided that putting it up there at least makes people know that it's there and it's available. Here's from our 10 o'clock news collection. This has the flip problem where we have videos and we have no description. So here's some of the records where we did digitize. Obviously, they have much more robust description because we were able to actually watch it and describe it and catalog it in full. Wow, this is really advancing fast. I wonder if I can stop it. Where's my, is that doing it? Let's see. And I can't really see my notes. Just hold on. There we go. Okay. That's better. Okay, sorry about that. So here we go. Maybe now timing better. We have a faceted filter on the left side, as you can see. You can sort by dates. You can sort by collection. You can sort by people. No, it's still advancing. Oh well, I'll just talk really fast. This is an example of a story. The news broadcasts were broken into stories because that's how they existed on the film. The film reels, we didn't necessarily have the final aired broadcast from WCVB or WHDH. That would meant that they would have had to record off the air as they were broadcasting, since it was a live broadcast, but we did have the packaged stories from the news reporters, and we preserved those and made those available as individual news stories. And if a user wanted to see a story that we didn't digitize, they can request that we preserve and digitize it for free to cover the costs. So we're now digitizing stories that people want to see and use that they found through the catalog search. We did digitize about 50 hours that we chose. We put out a public request to the public to ask us, of these stories that you can see the metadata, which ones would you want us to digitize? And those were the ones that we actually put up. This is the process that we do. We're calling it digitization on demand. It sends an email to us with the reference code of the item that they want. We pass that along to the collection holder, whether it's the BPL holder of the WHDH collection or Northeast Historic Film holder of the WCVB collection. And they'll give you a quote on how much it would cost to make it digitized. And we've had quite a few new materials go up as a result of that process. So this is our rights chart. Given that news reporters never get permission or releases, and daily news was considered ephemeral at the time. It aired one night, it was gone the next. They didn't consider any rights issues for the nightly broadcasts. So what we have is an archive. How can we allow access to these materials? We have no releases, we have no permissions. We decided to rely on fair use and the rights given to an archive or a library to allow us to make the material accessible as a whole for scholarly and educational research. We developed this flow chart of questions for other archives and libraries to ask themselves as to whether they can feel that they can also make their materials accessible. We do not claim to assume that we know your situation or what risks you can or can't take, but this is a chart to kind of help people walk through the issues. So this is our website. It's now up. It's been up for several years. Again, the data there is thin. If you have any information about any of the stories that are there, we would love to hear from you to help us improve the collection. So now we're on to the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. This is a collaboration between the Library of Congress and WGBH in Boston. WGBH is a public broadcasting station in Boston, both TV and radio. We produce about a third of the material that goes out on the PBS network. Our primary objective is to preserve public media before the content is lost and to assure discoverability and access through coordinated national effort. In doing this, we're supporting content creators, current stewards of the material, and facilitate the use of historic public broadcasting by researchers, educators, students, and others. The initial collection of 40,000 hours included about 100 radio and TV stations across the country. It is radio also, it's not just television. We've since added to the collection with materials from academic institutions, producers, and other content creators. But as a result, much of the material in the collection is very much local content from numerous communities across the country. And a lot of it is news, public affairs, talk shows, things that were important to those local communities. As an aggregator of this content, the AAPB hopes to provide a centralized web portal for discovery with approximately 1,250 public radio and TV stations across the country. One access point will aid researchers to discover how national topics have been covered in divergent localities over the past 60 years. If stations and archives send us digitized files, we will add them to the collection and preserve them at the Library of Congress. If they send just proxies, we will access them on our website. If they only send metadata, we will provide direct links to their streams on their websites for research. Our online reading room allows website access to anyone in the United States. Programs are added periodically to the online reading room. We review them for any legal concerns. Online access is determined according to the copyright law of the United States, including the legal doctrine of fair use. Over the past year, we've worked diligently viewing and reviewing materials that we are now able to make 30% of the whole collection available to anyone in the United States. It's about 23,000 items, and it's available for research, educational, and informational purposes. And I want to say that this is a painstaking process when you have so much material. We don't go through and do every single individual item. We have buckets of things that we have determined are available. So I think I talk about it a little bit later, but so we picked types of programs like talk shows or news programming or public affairs programming that we consider a bucket that is potentially available for fair use. And that's one way we've sort of put a whole series of materials as opposed to having to look at any individual thing. We do have on our terms of use agreement, we ask everyone to click a terms of use to say you're only going to use this for educational and scholarly purposes. We also have a statement saying that if there's anything up here that you think shouldn't be up there because of copyright issues, we will take it down. So far, we've had no problems. Which one is it? Oops, did I miss one? Oh, I missed this one. So, however, the entire collection of over 50,000 hours is available on location at the Library of Congress or WGBH. It's one way we can make the entire collection available is for you to come physically to our location. The online reading room is available through the web throughout the United States. We've also started, we created transcripts using Caldi, a speech-to-text tool with the pop-up archive, to create transcripts. We know the transcripts are not 100% accurate, so we've created a game called Fix It, as you can see in this little, whoops, yellow box. It's a game to engage the public to help us fix those transcripts that we know aren't accurate and to try to get them as accurate as possible. So I'm going to encourage everyone to play the game, not right now, but at some point soon. We are in beta testing at the moment, so we're about to launch another version of it that hopefully will fix some of the issues in Fix It. So the American Archive in many ways had similar problems as the Boston local TV news. We had very little metadata for a lot of the items, but we did have digital files to look at, so it gives us a better shot at describing the files either manually or using computational tools, and I'm looking really at using these tools that these guys have created to help us figure out what all this content is that we may not know. We also have radio news, not just television, and with very little descriptive data and not much time to look at this material or listen to it, it's really hard to judge how to make it accessible. So again, we use these buckets. Radio is a little bit easier than television because you don't have the image issues of some of the identification problems for reliability. However, we did, one thing I do want to say is that at the very beginning of the project, we brought the legal counsel for the Library of Congress in, WGBH's legal counsel, and you know something? I'm going to pause this so it doesn't keep advancing. Maybe that'll help. We brought in all these, and the Berkman Center at Harvard Law School came in, and we had a huge group of lawyers in a room together, and we all thought, oh my God, we're never going to get anything done. What can you possibly get done with a bunch of lawyers in the room? But we all came to an agreement that we all want to make this material accessible. So what is the easiest way that we can do this? And we thought about, okay, who's going to get mad if we do this? Who are the big people out there that we need to be worried about? What's the big risk? So if a record record has anything to do with sports, and it has NFL, it has a sports team, it's automatically put aside for only on-site access. If it doesn't have any identifiable people necessarily, or it's a public persona, then it goes into a bucket that we think we can make available. So that's kind of the judgments that we have come up. We've come up with guidelines. We really hope to publish those guidelines, although we're a little wary about it because it fits our situation and it might not necessarily fit everybody's situation. So we are currently digitizing the NewsHour collection and posting the programs online as they are processed. This is about a 30-year collection for the NewsHour programs that were aired from the very beginning. We also, oops, am I going backwards? Some of them have transcripts and some of them don't. We do need to, we are capturing different metadata. For example, we have the titles of the program, and the title of the NewsHour program is the same every single day. It's the NewsHour program. So the title of it's not going to help you too much if you're doing a search, but it's going to be the date and what the content is within it. So we're really hoping to get transcripts for all of the content. Some of the material that we do have transcripts for, the transcripts are searchable. As you can see here, it highlights where in the transcript your search item came up, and then at some point when we can timestamp it, we'll be able to link that piece of the transcript to that piece of the video, and you can go directly there. I'm going backwards now. Once you have data that can be searched, both descriptive and the transcripts, you can start searching the collection as a data set, which we are really, really looking for people to do and to use our collection in that way. We're hoping to allow access to the transcripts as a data set through an API. You could look for trends in style, trends in language, economic trends, voting trends, sound recognition, image recognition. It is a 60-year, cross-60-year collection of material across the country. So it is a historic mosaic of our country over the last 60 years. You could use the collection for machine learning with all of our digital files, refine the speech-to-text tools. There are accents from all over the country. There are language mannerisms that you could study. So we see that this collection could easily be used as a data set in any number of ways, and we really encourage you to talk to us about doing that and what we can do to make the collection more available as a data set. So our biggest, here I'm going to start evangelizing, our biggest challenge has time limitations, and it is imperative to address this if we want to save the content past the digital world. So the earlier content that is on analog format is dying right now. There was a report that came out in 2012 by AV Preserve that basically gave us a 15 to 20-year window for the older material before they are unplayable. Right now that is probably about 10 to 15 years, and there is a lot of material out there that will go away, and we will lose this history. This is what videotape looks like when it gets old and unplayable. That's Julia Child in the bottom picture. Needless to say, the content is lost. The risks to these collections are bad storage. You saw the picture at the very beginning of how the NewsHour was stored. The shelf life of magnetic tapes, regardless of the storage, is limited. The playback equipment is becoming harder to find and breaking down. The engineers who know how to use the equipment are retiring. Currently, digitization is preservation for analog video and audio. There is no other physical medium to migrate this content to that has any kind of shelf life. However, as you will see shortly, the digital preservation also has its own challenges, as you all know. Preserving online news has similar challenges to preserving analog to digital. Once we've digitized the past history and migrated it to the digital form, we need to start worrying about preservation. So, and that's true for the online and preserving online news. The questions you have to think about is, what does the quality of the preservation file need to be? If you're grabbing things offline, off the web, is that good enough quality down the line? If it's coming off the web, it's probably a proxy format and not a long-term preservation quality. Does that matter? It might not matter if that's the only thing that you can do. Will you get the accompanying metadata, and how will it be associated with the content file? How will you preserve the context in which the news was delivered online? A website has many, many stories on one page as opposed to each individual stories. Are you going to show how all of those stories are related on the web page, and how are you going to do that? You're going to need more than one copy, obviously. You're going to need to do fixity checks and migrations. You need to worry about multiple file formats, file naming conventions, software and hardware migrations, and just to name a few things. So that's my evangelist. I'm done. My biggest question, which I think everybody has alluded to, is how do you make these collections useful? So once they are in a digital form, once you can search them, once you can use computational tools to enhance their metadata, what can we do with these collections to make them useful? It's really important that we do that to show value. In showing value, we can raise resources to better preserve them for a longer term, and we want partnerships and collaborations. So I'm more than welcome and open to partnerships and collaborations to help us. Thank you. And I'm sorry my slides were ahead of me. I guess I wasn't talking fast enough. I should have had more coffee. We did just also, for the American Archive, just launched us an exhibit. We have special exhibits that are curated of the Watergate hearings. It's the first time the entire gavel-to-gavel coverage of the Watergate hearings is online for the public access, so please check that out on the website. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, AmericanArchive.org here. Can I go? Where's my last slide? I think it's there. Oops. We are with our Fix-It game. There's the websites. Open Vault is the GBH archive collection. With our Fix-It game, we are relaunching, and we would love feedback from people as you play the game. What are some things that work and don't work? Right now we realize that we have 68,000 transcripts in there, and we have not yet, since in the last 6 months, actually gotten any full transcript out. So the problem is that we've broken it up into little tiny pieces. That's how we're getting around the fair use issues, similar to how the Internet Archive breaks up their news streaming into little pieces. We've kind of taken a nod to that and only allowed short pieces of the content to appear at any given time for people to be correcting the transcripts. So, but you can roll through it in a 20-minute chunk if you go through an entire game. So you get to see the 20 minutes of the piece. But that said, we have over 700 players, and they've identified about 15,000 errors, but we haven't yet gotten a full transcript out the door. So we went back and re-looked at our algorithm for the game and realized that the algorithm was faulty, and it was going to be requiring thousands and thousands and thousands of people to touch every single transcript. So we're changing that. We're fixing it. But I really encourage people to take a look at it. And also, please use our materials as a data set and tell us how you need us to be making it available, because that's really important. And if you know of any collections that would want to donate to the American Archive, let us know. We're looking for digital collections. Any questions? Any other questions? Pardon me? Julia Child has been preserved. You're happy to know, probably not so happy to know that it is in distribution on DVD, so we can't make it freely accessible yet until that distribution window is over. So that's a lot of our challenges with our rights is, we want to distribute them as a DVD to sort of recoup some revenue from creating the programs, but I'm hoping that at some point we have a window where anything that's older than 20 years old, we can put it into the archive and then make it freely accessible. Any other questions? Okay.
Okay, so I'm always interested in educational opportunities that can extend beyond the first use of something. And so there's this field. This is going in and out. Open educational resources. Oh. And no, it stops by itself. Okay, so I'm curious how I've supported. They're a different mic.
So you're talking about open educational resources, OER. It was a.
Maybe you could explain what OER is.
OER is Open Educational Resources. I think it was a movement. Hewlett Foundation was really supporting it for a long time. I think they still are, which is allowing materials to be out on the web for educational use. I think they want it to be downloadable and fully editable and transferable, allowing students and teachers to take bits and pieces of things and mash them up, basically. So I would say about 10, 15 years ago, roughly, we started a project called Teachers Domain, which was going back into our archives and pulling content out and creating clips that we produced out of the programming specifically for teaching concepts. So they were tied to the teaching standards and the teaching curriculum. We listed out the standards that this, like for example, in science you have to teach about DNA, right? So we would pull a clip out of a NOVA program specifically targeted for the standard that teaches about DNA, wrap it around with lesson plans and so forth. Teachers Domain is now PBS Learning Media. In the process of that, we worked with the Hewlett Foundation to try to see how we could push making these resources that we were putting out there as OER resources. And given all of our rights issues between the talent unions that we have with our final programs, the third-party material that's often used, it was really a challenge for us. So what we did was we came up with tiers of access. I'm never one to take no for an answer from our legal department. When they say no, I say, well, what do I have to do to get to a yes? So we came up with different tiers. One tier was, this resource is fully downloadable, fully accessible, you can edit it and mash it up and do whatever you want. Tier 2 is, you can download this clip, but you can't edit it. You need to use it exactly the way it is and exactly the way it's framed, but you can download it. And 3 is that you can just stream this from our website. And we're really sorry, but that is the only way we can give you the rights to it at all. So we did go back and had to clear rights for every single piece that we put out there, but often people were willing to give us that tier 1 access, but rather than shutting down the archive and not letting anything accessible, we tried to push out as much as we could with these different tiers.
Hi, thanks. James Jacobs. I'll go right up to the mic. Thanks for sharing the information about the Watergate hearings. I'm a government information librarian, so I've been trying to get my head around, or trying to crack the nut of connecting the analog to the digital in libraries specifically. Our catalogs don't really do that very well, and I'm wondering if you have any ideas about, or if LC is working on anything to connect up, so we have, like I have hearings and other government reports on Watergate, and now this video is out there, the transcripts are out there. How do you connect to?
Wow. We would be happy to put a link to your resources, but your resources aren't online. We have the government documents. Well, the Watergate transcripts are connected. The Watergate transcripts are connected to the video. If I can get to the...
Right. So you have HathiTrust, where the hearings, the physical documents have been scanned, and now you have the transcripts and the audio and the video. So I would think researchers and students would really be interested in knowing, when they come to a library catalog, here's the physical documents, here's the video, here's the audio, here's the whole thing, here's the context. And we saw that with the news archive as well. They're starting to get the context.
Put all those things together. Our mandate is to just preserve and collect public media materials. So if there's other materials out there that we can link to, we would be happy to link to it. So I guess if you just tell us where they are, we'll reference it. Pardon me? Yeah. I guess I'm not understanding what you're. They're not in the American Archive catalog. Oh, they're in the LC's catalog. Oh, well. They're not. It's not my catalog. It's the Library of Congress's catalog. It's all of our catalogs. That's a really good point. I do have to say that as a result of the American Archive, we've started to get the library more interested in digitizing their audiovisual collections, but we haven't made the connections to their other documents, which is actually a really good idea and a good point that we should collaborate with them on. Yeah, good. I'm sorry, you kept saying my catalog, and I kept thinking, GBH? Remember? Yes, the library has a lot of materials that we could be working with. Yeah, oh, no, don't, please don't. Okay, let me see. Which one do you want to see? John Dean. Did I just pass John Dean? Here, this one? So here's the terms of use that you have to agree to. It might take a moment for it to download. There's a really good essay that went along. Sorry, we did the whole raw piece, bars and tones included. No editing.
Had problems, but whether Mr. Higbee had related that to him or not, I certainly did not. So it's very hard for me to interpret exactly what that phrase means, and I think only Mr. Jones could testify to what he meant by that.
Well, I think then it's fair for the record for this committee. Is it your testimony that Mr. Jerry Jones, who had been asked to prepare this memorandum and seek out these options, did not himself, from your knowledge, know what Mr. Magruder's problems were or anything about the Watergate or the cover?
Not from my knowledge, did he? In fact, when I was talking about this with Higbee before Mr. Jones prepared this, one of the jobs I had heard of after talking with Jeb that he might be interested in is the job that ended up as number 1, which was the assistant to the Secretary or Deputy Undersecretary of Commerce for Policy Development. And apparently Mr. Higbee relayed that on to Mr. Jones. No, I don't know.
There's some of John Dean. There's actually a really good piece. We recently celebrated the 50th anniversary of signing the Public Broadcasting Act. Yay. And we had a discussion with a lot of the early founders of public media. And Jim Lehrer was on our panel, and he actually said that the Watergate hearings and their decision to air the Watergate hearings gavel to gavel, unedited, complete, was really the launch of the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour, and that it really did put public television on the map, and no one had any idea that the public would be so engaged. So.
Does this connect with Vanderbilt's TV collection of Watergate hearings?
Which one?
Vanderbilt?
No, it doesn't.
Have they done any of this?
We have a link to their resources, but we have not connected to them. Actually, that's something that I'm really interested in trying to do. How do we connect all of these online collections in a way that's useful for researchers? I mean, we feel like we're aggregating public media. Internet Archive is aggregating broadcast television. Vanderbilt's, aggregating online broadcast television also. So how do we make a connection between these separate silos so that it's useful to researchers? I'm really interested in that, and if anybody has any thoughts. Anything else? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And it's time for us to take a break. Let's take about 15 minutes. So we'll be back here at 10:40. Mark, you're going to lead us, and we're gonna have a discussion, have a conversation together. Okay. So, and there, as my understanding is, we have some slips. Your assignments are going to be given to you downstairs to fill out, answer some questions, circle some answers, something like that. So look for those. All right, see you back here in 15 minutes. Okay. So we're going to lead off with an announcement from Anna Kramer.
Hello, I'm announcing this on behalf of the International Federation of Library Associations News Media Committee. We will be holding the International News Media Conference in the third week of April in Gainesville, Florida, hosted by the University of Florida. We will send out an announcement and a save the date information very soon, within the next week or two. CFP will go out at that point. We will have submissions requested by mid-January. So please keep your eye out. I will have Edward email this to everybody's email address here in the room. And we would love to have any and all of you. It's about news preservation of any kind. But since Florida is our host, they will have a lot of speakers from their area as well as from Puerto Rico talking about preservation of at-risk materials and the, of course, major perils that materials have faced. So thank you.
Excellent, thank you for that. So we moved around the mics a little bit, and we've got a wired mic over there. Should work a little better. Okay, so here's the part of the program where we had, we're going to be listening to Danny Lelsberg share with us, and that's not happening. So we've got 20 minutes before a presentation about the Swedish illegal deposit law. And here's what I thought we might do. So later on today, we've got a session where we're going to kind of open it up a little bit to talk about, where we go as people that are working on, collaborative activities, maybe kind of organizationally or structurally or whatever have you. But right now, how about something we might try a little experiment, maybe very practical. We use Slack a lot at the Internet Archive as the primary communications medium where we share information and ask questions and report. It's really, in many ways, replaced email for us. And it works great for teams of people that are working together. And as I mentioned yesterday, there's a Slack channel that I've set up called Wayback-Labs-G, G being meaning it's open to the general public. And there's about 100 people in that right now. So whenever anyone comes up to me with an idea about, hey, I'd love to collaborate. I'm a designer. I'm a developer. I've got an idea. I want some help with something relative to the Wayback Machine. I say, great. You can join the Slack channel and share your question, because it's really about trying to foster a community of people who can support each other in kind of a classic mutual aid kind of way. Well, one of our other Slack channels is called Have Want. So I have this. I want this. So, okay, how about this? How about relative to the work that we're doing together to help save, preserve, archive, make available, enhance, create value from, and deliver value through online news? What are some suggestions, ideas that people have in the context of this is something that you have that may be available to some other people, and this is something maybe that you would want. You'd want to see in the world or want some help with, or like that. How does that sound? Like for another 20 minutes or so. So haves and wants relative to what we're here together talking about saving online news. Yes, sir, right over there. I see a hand.
We've got unlimited storage, unlimited bandwidth, forever for free. So that's we have those. We have all the people that read that all. We've got some level of ability to we can ingest massive amounts of materials. We can do some searching. We can OCR things at scale. Those sort of things. What we don't have is subject expertise. We have technological expertise, but we don't have subject expertise. If we
Excellent, thank you. So Brewster and the Internet Archive have unlimited storage forever, for free, for anyone, for pretty much anything. Someone asked me during the break just now, so are there limits? And I'm like, no, just press that upload button, try us out. And so that's what we've got here, and we're looking for domain experts. So I'll just say, so what I've got is, I've got this desire to do a much better job of archiving the world's online news. So what do I need? I too need some help. I need a lot of help, actually. But I need in particular domain experts. And let me explain what I mean by that a little bit. So, yeah, I can go to the Wikipedia pages, I can go to the online directories and the encyclopedias and the databases, and I can find lists of, but it wasn't until I found working journalists in Honduras, in Turkey, in Iran, where I really started to kind of get below the surface a little bit and find out about some of those resources that weren't listed in some of those other places. So, very specifically, 3 graduate students from UC Berkeley's iSchool came to me 2 weeks ago and said, I've got 2 months to work on a project that has to do with organizing information. Do you have an idea what I might organize? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I'm trying to organize a resource directory of all the world's online news information. So they're helping to build that in the form of it'll be a public Google Doc, and so, that means that anyone here could add to it and also use it and make suggestions on, metadata field that we could add to it, etc. So if anyone would like to help in that project or benefit from it, mark@archive.org. Anyone else? What do you have? What do you want? I was going to ask Dan about how can we work to reduce the risks of nuclear war in the context of North Korea, but oh well, have to have that conversation another time. Anyone? Roger, you must have something or want something. Someone else? Catherine, you must. Everyone has everything they want, and you're not very good at sharing. Is that what I'm hearing? You're in California, in a library. Yes, Will.
So, I had an idea.
And while he's speaking, think of something.
Testing, good. All right. So the point was made about how the Internet Archive primarily can store the data, but the compute should be offsourced to somewhere else. And I think this might actually be a really interesting opportunity to explore software like SETI at home. So I don't know for those of you who have heard projects like this, but there have been a number of research projects over the last few decades, well, really like last decade or two, where researchers built little tools that made it easy for people at home to use spare compute resources that they had to do some processing. So in the context of SETI at home, SETI was the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, wasn't particularly successful, but I think the idea was that the NASA or whoever was running it could offload some of the computation that they weren't able to afford themselves to people who just wanted to help out at home. And similarly here, I can say from experience that some of these computations are going to get incredibly expensive, and research might reduce those costs, but fundamentally, if you want to be able to extract metadata from particularly the video, like in our case, processing 100 hours of video and doing the post extraction like I showed earlier cost upwards of $1,000. So that's, our funding is going to run out at some point, and even you can't necessarily always rely on sort of large fundable benefactors or whatever to ensure the future of this metadata extraction. So I think one interesting platform that people could start to develop, or I guess one of my want-to-haves, would be once I run out of money to run compute on top of the Internet Archive data set, I think people would get really interested in using open source tools, something you could download on your computer, and then it would just run a pose detector or a face detector ambiently on top of, say, random frames from TV news that we haven't processed yet. Kind of similar to the Fix-It game in terms of using crowdsourced help, but in this case, you don't actually need people to directly help. You just need their computer's processing power. So I think there might be a space here for a crowdsourced compute platform so you could try to ameliorate some of the intense costs associated with the compute.
Got it. So like SETI at home, but for making sense of video news.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. You're looking for some big iron or some distributed little pieces of iron. Yes.
So what I wanted, and I got from, who's the lady from Dallas Morning News, was, thank you, a way to make the case for a digital asset management system locally that we can use. So thank you very much. Wanted, needed, got it, right? So another want is that we're an association, and we do, turns out, digital born, we didn't know it, born digital nursing knowledge. And that goes out of date, and we need to pull it away from being the first thing people see. What we need is an online archive. The only model we see is the old website for AHRQ, where they've just taken their old website, turned it all black and white, and said, there you go. We're looking for some way to keep nursing knowledge available even after it passes its 5 years usefulness, but still public and still in our domain. That's want and need. Thank you.
Excellent. So last night, about 25 of you gathered around, and I raised my voice very loudly in the room downstairs, and I gave a demonstration of our book scanning technology. So someone came to me yesterday and said, I've got this big, heavy, thick book full of data, and I want to liberate that data from the paper and the ink. And they gave me the book, and it's already been scanned. Yay! It's already been scanned, and it's now being derived and processed and all the rest of that in the machines back there and other kind of places. So there's that. So, if you've got books that you want to have scanned and made available, if you give us the book, we'll just do it. That's one thing. Another thing is some of us also who are authors who wrote a wonderful book about archiving online news came to me yesterday and said, hey, I'm willing to make that book available to be lent one at a time through your digital service. And I said, okay. And so that should be done later today as well. So if you're a book author and you would like to make your book available digitally through our lending library at Open Library at archive.org, please let me know. Yes?
I would love to be able to link all the digital newspapers. I would love to be able to link all the digital newspapers and all the digital online news somehow, so that you could do a search on this day in history and get how the events of that day might have been covered at different localities across the country in both print and media.
Excellent.
Just a little.
Excellent. So I'd like some help to help her get what she wants. There's a lot of material that's available, and there's more that's coming available, but building more interfaces. So here's what I want. I want perspectives. I want the ability for someone to read a story, look at a story, and then flip some switches, turn some knobs. Like, for example, geography? Give me that story from a different country. Language? Media, I'm reading it in text, give it to me in video. Time, I'm reading about that story from a certain date, but I want to read about that story like back in time. Or maybe set up an alert and give me some updates about how the story evolves. May follow the story back in time or forward in time. So I want a machine that would help me see the world from other people's perspectives based upon different ways to access and consume online news. Yes?
I have two things, please. One based on my working roles, and also based on a personal thing that I do on. One would be I would like to see more coverage of historical U.S. newspapers in Internet Archive. Specifically now you can get it from Chronicling America for free. You can also, maybe you're at an institution that has subscription products from Redax and Gale that have coverage of historical U.S. newspapers. And, for somebody who's into genealogy, I have to have subscriptions, personal subscriptions to at least 3 other modules or services that have other U.S. historical newspapers online. So I've, dabbled in 5 or 6 different things, either both for work or for pleasure there. So I'd like to see more of that. I'm sorry that's not, boring digital news, but it is, I think, important things to have. And I have one other thing.
Yeah.
The other thing I would like to see, the television news archive expand into news from places around the world, excuse me. So, getting more foreign news, either in the broadcast or perhaps in the printed press or online press. Okay. Thank you.
On the genealogy bit, I was going to say, I know that wasn't the totality of what you're saying, but we work very closely with some people involved in genealogy, and that's actually one of the primary use of the Internet Archive is doing genealogical research, and so actually there's been a lot written about how to do genealogical research with the Internet Archive. Roger, do you want to talk about where you're going with trying to get more news archived, TV news archived?
We'd love.
I want better microphones. Can I just say that? All right? Anyone got better microphones? Bring it on.
Lavaliers. We'd love your and anybody you know who's a specialist who's got significant insight in television and other media from around the world. We'd love to collaborate with them. We'd love their advice on what should we be getting? What should we not making sure that it is not only preserved, but how can we work together with others to make those available? Oh, I thought you were saying, we too. Because as Brewster said, we're librarians, and we are really guided by the library users, and our conversations with the users of the television archive who've been scholars and journalists has been crazy helpful for us. We need that conversation going. So, that said, not only the television archive, but the rest of the Internet Archive, each and every one of us wants to have continuing conversations with you and those who you might know and introduce us to about how we can best help. Because as Brewster said, this is a place of generosity and open arms. There's lots of servers, there's lots of bandwidth, and there's folks like us who say, what can we do to help?
Thank you. Is this even on? Okay, I'll try not to eat the microphone, but make this...
Use your outside voice.
Outside voice. Okay, so we've got a high-fidelity web archiving tool called Web Recorder. So you can go to webrecorder.io and also give Web Recorder Player a try and dream big. Do whatever you can in terms of web archiving. Don't assume the tool can't do certain things. And if you somehow reach a limit, let us know. We want to know. So we want you to use it, and we want your bug reports if you reach any limit whatsoever. But yeah, use, abuse, try, keep us posted.
Excellent. The gold standard in web archiving.
All right, you asked for it. So 2 things. The first is in response to what you were just asking, Mark, and what Brewster and others here are inevitably always going to be interested in. How do you enlist the help of the specialists that you know are out there who could be better directing what it is that you do? You need some editorial boards. You need some groups that are empowered and get credit for doing that work with you, that you can set loose and have them do it. And and it's just a matter of putting the right arrangement around it. So I've got some ideas on that if you want to hear it over lunch, whatever. But in terms of what I want, so when I look at what is available right now, and y'all will hear more about this later on today because I'm doing a project on this right now. So this is my pet, right? But when I look around at what is available right now, there are two things that bother me. One is that most of it is behind a paywall, period. I mean, it just is. And so if you're not an academic, you don't have any way to easily get access to it. The second thing is that those things that are not behind paywalls are mostly your mainstream white newspapers. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about from colonial times or whether you're talking about from the 1920s or the 1960s. It's an incomplete record of history, and we are continuing to build on that incomplete record of history because that's what scholars, journalists, et cetera, turn to. And so there is a problem at the base level with what's been microfilmed, what's been digitized, and how it's available that impacts minority communities. And so giving attention to those collections that have actually been microfiched that are from marginalized communities and doing bulk scans of that kind of information could be huge. Being able to surface those voices in ways that allow those communities themselves to have access to them would be amazing. So there's my pet.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, and thank you for playing along. We're on track now. It's 11:11, and we're going to hear now from Sweden, and Stina Dugenstadt and Daniel Johansson, something like that, yeah, are going to present on the illegal deposit law and collection of online media news. And come on up here. I just want to put a plug in too. I mentioned yesterday, but every Friday we have an open lunch here. Send email to info@archive.org several days ahead of time if you want to come participate. One of the wonderful things about the lunch is that people come from all over the world, and we get to meet them and learn about what they're doing. And in the last 2 weeks, we've had people from the Norwegian National Archive and the Norwegian National Library. And so now I'm really happy to be hearing from the Swedish National Library as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting us. It's great to be here. It's very inspiring for both of us. We are going to talk about how the Swedish National Library is collecting and preserving news material on the internet. I think the situations in our respective countries differ slightly, but I think also all the issues that have been brought up here are practically the same in both our countries. I'm going to start to say a few words about where we come from in our library. The main building is situated in a park in the center of Stockholm, which is the capital of Sweden, as you may know. If it happens that we say the short form KB or KB in our presentation is because the Swedish name of the library is Kungliga biblioteket, or the Royal Library in English. The absolute primary task of the National Library is to ensure that the stories of the nation are preserved for the future. This means that we collect and preserve what is printed in Sweden or what is printed in Swedish elsewhere. This also applies to all audiovisual materials, like, for instance, films and TV programs, radio programs, music, video games that is created and distributed in Sweden, and also what is on the Swedish internet. many national libraries, the collections are built up by legal deposits, and then we'll continue to talk about that.
Yeah, hello. Sweden has had legal deposits since 1661 for printed materials, and the legislation has been updated throughout the years to follow the development of how information is published. So, most notably in 1979, the legislation was updated to incorporate audiovisual material and broadcasted television and radio. And finally, in 2012, we got a new legislation, the Legal Deposit Act for Electronic Material, that covers material that is published online. We have collected the Swedish web through web harvesting since '97, but now we get a new legislation with the purpose that captures the things that is hard to do with web harvesting and things that is not covered by the legislation for physical material. Subject to legal deposits are electronic material that has been made available to the public in Sweden and is of complete and permanent nature. That means that the web apps, like for example that we saw yesterday, is not covered by the law. It's more like finished things like reports, articles, film clips and things like that. And those who are compelled under the law to submit material are all who are guaranteed freedom of speech and press by the Swedish Constitution, and business enterprise that creates or distributes electronic materials as their main purpose, which means that IKEA and Volvo, they produce furniture and cars. They are not compelled under this law, but companies like publishers, newspapers, those are compelled under the law. And all municipal and government authorities are also compelled under the law. Sadly, the law stipulates that the National Library should collect all and preserve all this material, but for the moment we are not allowed to make anything available, which is really tragic. And there are quite good reasons for this, but it's really complicated, and we are not allowed to make it available until the government gives us further notice. And of course we are working hard to change this. And typical organizations that is under this law is, as I mentioned, municipal and government agencies, but also television, news agencies, universities, journals, and commercial blogs and things like that. And the typical material that is covered by the law is government reports, images, e-books, reports, sound bites, video clips, films, podcasts, blogs, and entire programs from web television services and play services. It doesn't matter if the material is behind a paywall, as long as the general public can gain access to the material in exchange for money, for example. This is actually one of the main targets for the new legislation, to get hold of high-value materials such as video on demand, music, e-books, and premium news articles, which is more and more common.
So, sorry, this legislation came for a few years ago. So, what were the challenges we had to deal with? It has required great efforts from our side to make all those thousands of suppliers aware of the new law. And also, we have the possibility to negotiate about metadata. And so another challenge has been to find suitable metadata standards that are accepted on both sides. We also wanted this new data flow to be integrated with and merged with the Natural Bibliographic Union catalog. And we also needed to develop a complete new ecosystem for long-term digital preservation. So there was quite a lot of things to do. And so how did we solve this? Well, first of all, we developed a system for storage and preservation of digital resources, and this system we call MIME. This is a system made for all digital collections, everything from e-deposits to in-house digitization. The data and metadata models are based on well-established open standards and best practices, and it conforms to the OAIS reference model. We're going to talk a bit about this system now. Deliveries of materials to this system can be done in different ways. First of all, we have support for feeds through RSS standard, which is the most dominant method for news media. This method is fully automated. The supplier sets up a feed, and whereupon the library retrieves all the files and the metadata. We also have support for FTP, and we have also a web form for if you have few deliveries occasionally. Sorry. Well, since this presentation is about news media, we will now continue to talk only about the RSS method. But it's important to emphasize that regardless of the delivery methods, all incoming files and metadata are treated in a similar way in the system.
And since we are going to talk mainly about the news media, I would just want to tell a little about how much news, how many news organizations does we work with. And in Sweden there are approximately 300 printed newspapers, but since most of them are organized in larger news corporations which shares their infrastructure for publishing online and things like that, they are represented by approximately 140 news sites, and 130 of those news sites have registered themselves in our system, and 119 of those have actually started to deliver material. I want to be honest about that. Not all material from those publishers, they don't send everything that is compelled under law, because sometimes they have problem to open up their paywalls, sometimes they have problems to send their videos, but they always try. Since newspapers today evolves so fast, and they always try new features, new things, this is going to be the reality forever. They're never going to just be the same. So the most important part for us is to have an ongoing dialogue with all the newspapers. So as soon as they try something new, we want to try to harvest that material as well. And just one really funny example is the largest newspaper in Sweden, Aftonbladet. I think it was last year, they purchased the exclusive rights to broadcast the Oscars in Sweden, and then they live streamed it on their site. So it's always getting new stuffs on newspaper sites that wasn't there before. So we are very happy about the ongoing dialogue. And we also collect some digital-born newspapers that don't have a printed paper, so they are above they are not a part of these 140 newspapers. And the interesting part with news online is that they take advantage of the medium and its features, the new media. It's not like an article printed in a paper which have a fixed form. They're always changing and evolving over time, especially during bigger events. So here I'm going to show you how an article evolves over time just during a 24-hour period. It's an armed robbery that occurred, I think it was last week in Sweden. And the first version usually differs a lot from later versions. It can be completely different. And for example, if you talk about the title of an electronic news article or the heading, it usually changes for every version, or it can change at any time. Even the URL or the link to the web page or to the article could change over time, especially when the title of the article is somewhat incorporated in the URL. So this is a big problem to talk about a specific article, because you have to talk about which version of this article. So in this case, the first version is just a short text. It has 2 images, and the 10th or last version here has much longer text. It has 6 images, and it also have a video connected to it. And this is how we collect this. The newspapers pushes all articles in RSS feeds, and each time a new article is published or an old article is updated, the article is pushed in the feed once more with an updated pub date. And all these versions is tied together by referring the SEM identifier. In this case, they all refer the same URI in the GUID element. And one thing that distinguishes our RSS specification from an ordinary RSS feed is that every object that is part of the article, for example, the text, the images, the movie, everything like that, has to be explicitly linked by a media content element so that KB exactly knows which files to fetch. And then KB reads the entire feed. We read it for now once an hour, so we don't get any more version than 1 version each hour. But this will probably change in the future, where we will read different feeds from different suppliers on different frequencies. For example, newspapers will probably be read every minute or every 5 minutes. But after we had read the feed, we will extract each item from the feed and enrich it with the RSS channel items, and then we will also read the metadata and download all the files that is referred by the metadata. And this is what we called the submission information package, or the SIP, which is then ingested into our system. And as you can see here, it doesn't matter which method the material is delivered, even if it comes through RSS or if it comes through FTP or web upload. After it's ingested, it ends up in the same inbox, and from there on, all material is treated in the exactly same manner. So it's only the retrieval part that differs from different methods. And the SIPs end up on a queue in our system, and then they are moved into a chain of process steps, where the first step is the validation, where we see that the metadata conforms to our specification. We do fixity checks, we determine missing files and things like that. And the next step is the enrichment part. And since legislation gives us limited authority to demand metadata, especially bibliographic metadata, we try to enrich the material as much as possible based on the prerequisites available. And we add a file format that detection. We enrich it with information from our national catalog. We enrich it from our supplier directory. And regardless of in which supported incoming metadata format the material is delivered, the package is normalized to a uniform archival information package, which has a METS container, and then we have the bibliographic metadata in mods, and the preservation metadata is expressed in the premise metadata standard. We can also wrap any other kind of metadata standard. So for example, in our in-house digitization, we wrap the mix metadata standard for camera information. And just to give you a hint on how much metadata that is added, because we add a lot of metadata regarding agents and actions that happens through the system. Everything that we do with the material is record in the metadata. So the 50 lines of RSS that is derived from the zip becomes almost 1,000 lines of AIP XML. That means that sometimes we actually write more metadata than actual data for some shorter articles. We love metadata. And if the material is subject for cataloging, we will search the national catalog for all identifiers found in the incoming metadata. And if there is no previous record in the national catalog, we will write a new record. If there is a previous record, we will reuse the previous record and just add a holding record, which means that we have a copy of this. And after that is done, all metadata, because in the national catalog we only write the bibliographic metadata, but after we have done that, we write all the metadata, all the 1,000 lines of XML in a metadata repository, which is a native XML database that we use to be able to search fast in the archive. It's not part of our preservation system, but it is so that we can have it operable on a daily basis. And after that, we finally write the material to both tape and discs in several copies and on different locations. And the AIP that we write on tape is a self-sufficient package, which mean with self-sufficient is that all information in all surrounding systems that is about this AIP can be recreated from the information in the AIP. So if we only have the backup files found on tape, we can recreate all information in all other systems from that. And of course, we always preserve an untouched version of the original metadata that was sent from the supplier. And of course, the same things goes for all AIPs, all ZIPs. So each versions go through the same process steps, and if it's a version, it will find a previous record in the catalog, and it will reuse that catalog record. And now I will talk a little bit and show you our data model, but I won't go into any details. If you're interested, you can ask me later. But the most important part with our data model is that it's totally based on references between identifiers, and the most important identifier is the package resource identifier, which represents the intellectual entity of a work, and that is the identifier that all instances of, for example, an article refers, that makes us being able to connect all the versions of a specific article.
Just a short repetition of what Daniel said earlier about the metadata flow. All metadata, regardless of delivery method or the specifications or the format, will be automatically transformed into these mods standard file and put into MIME metadata repository. But in order to make the metadata discoverable even for a wider public, the system is uploaded with MARC records in a national unit catalog, but not for news articles. We did this initially, but we had to stop after a while because the thousands of catalog entries poured in every day and almost drowned the whole catalog system. And also because of the media changes all the time, and there are a lot of versions, we have metadata that can identify all the versions and the relations and connections to each other, but this is not compatible with the traditional cataloging models. Well, this could be solved in many different ways, of course, but we have decided to wait for this. One of the reasons is that our union catalog is facing a major upheaval. In about 2 months, we will change to a brand new platform, which will be released on, or based on linked data, RDF, and BibFrame formats. And with this, we see there will be greater possibilities of integrating descriptions of different types of materials. We can link to between different catalogs, perhaps, and then also we can treat multiple versions in a better way than we can today.
Yeah, and being able to do research on different versions is very interesting from many perspectives, and I will show you another example of that. Here's an article published by one of the largest newspapers in the town of Gothenburg in Sweden. It was written by a professor, and it's about, the title is "We Have to Speak About Islam." And as soon as it was published, it got a lot of criticism in social media, and she was accused of being Islamophobic, and that it was criticized for that she had interpreted the statistics completely wrong that the article was based on. And when I read about this critique, I was curious, how has our system preserved this article, and how can I follow the things that has happened here? And this is the text from her article, so I just checked what has happened here, and because she did a lot of new versions, she published a lot of new versions and changed a lot of stuff because of the critique, and she had to do quite many changes before the critique stopped. So this is the first version. In the second version, only the title had changed. In the third version, you can see that here started happening a lot of stuff. And in the fourth version, there's a lot of changes. And in this final version that is available on the web today, all the controversial things are not there anymore. So if you would read about the critique today and then go and read the article, I think you would find the critique unfounded and maybe unjust. But I don't think that is entirely true, because there were a lot of controversial stuff in that article before, but they are not available today. So this is, I think, a very important example of why we need to preserve as many versions as possible. We have one version every hour for the moment, and I think that is better than no versions, but probably it would be even better with more versions. But this leads to another dilemma, and that is, even though the article itself is covered by our legislation, the comments and critique in social media is not covered by the law. And I think without the critiques and comments, it would be very difficult for a researcher in the future to understand why these changes happened. So there are limitations to our new legislation, but it's things that we have to look into, and we are starting that work, and we think that we need a variety of techniques where the combination gives us a reasonable, comprehensive picture of the Swedish cultural heritage. And this chart is some kind of comparison between different techniques, and this chart is totally based on the Swedish conditions, so it's no general truth in no way, but for us the web harvesting efforts it kind of paints the broad picture. It tries to capture the whole Swedish web, but in a very shallow way, maybe. And the electronic legal deposits focuses on capturing single publications with more expressive metadata and all versions, and it tries to capture premium material behind paywalls and something, and sometimes this legislation also it focuses on the information, not the presentation. So sometimes this kind of collections lacks the context, and it sometimes lacks the visual presentation of material, since we sometimes only get the text and images and things like that, but not how it looked on the web page and in which context. So we think that we need more techniques and some kind of selective collection where we use like social feed manager and things to collect social media comments, things like that. And also we would love to use the kind of tool that Ilya presented yesterday with high fidelity recording of the web pages. But all that kind of selection harvest, or what do you call it, need a lot of resources. You have to be selective, and that costs money. So we have to work out our principles regarding that. It's necessarily not anything wrong with our legislation, but we think that we need to have acknowledgement for that we need other kind of techniques to complement the legislation. And that's problematic for us today, because our web harvesting is not acknowledged by law. We just do it, and we don't get any funds for it either, so we have to take the funds from other things we are doing. So what we are doing right now is that we are trying to get our government to look into the possibilities of giving us a unified legislation for both physical and electronic material, and to acknowledge our web harvesting and selective collections. And it would be great if we could get the digital version, even if there is an analog version. And then, of course, we want to be able to show it, the material, to researchers, with our biggest drawbacks right now.
This is our last picture. This is taken from a pronouncement for this conference. It's about us. It's very flattering, but I wonder if it's true. Well, in some ways it is. Of course, we are proud of what we have achieved, but there are a lot of things left to do, I'm sure. But we are, of course, I think we have been most successful in creating this stable preservation system. This is format agnostic, and it can handle a lot of materials. We also think we succeeded in maintaining this dialogue with the media industry that Daniel was talking about. But I will stop here for questions and comments. Thank you for listening.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's Regina Roberts. So I know you said that it's not open for researchers, but it sounds like it could be in the future. And if that happens, the metadata repository, would that be robust enough for people to do text analysis on like big corpora of newspapers or the news?
The preservation system is more of a system-to-system configuration. So when we are going to make this available for researchers in the future, it probably is going to be that we will extract the material and put it into a discovery layer or something like that. We have that in place for our digitized newspaper that uses the exactly same system. And there we have a discovery layer, and there we have the Metz Alter files that is fully indexed, and you can search it and get highlights on the page where the hit is and things like that. So they are not going to use the metadata repository that we have today, but it's sufficient to know what kind of material that is supposed to go into which discovery layer.
Right. So if people wanted just like a big dump of the XML files, they could potentially get that.
Yeah,
and work with
that's
it,
technically
like
feasible today with no problem.
Okay, thank you.
I'm doing a lot of work right now with another organization specifically about looking at how content of web pages changes over time. Am I on now? Okay, so I've been doing a lot of work recently with an organization looking specifically at how particular web pages change over time. Okay. So I was really interested to see your slide about that one opinion piece. And I was curious if you have developed particular tools or ways of visualizing those changes or anything else that you've found have worked well or not well, and if any of those additionally are like publicly available in any form.
Sorry, we have not. We really want that kind of tools as well, and since we have had this kind of stupid legislation that says that we are not allowed to make it public, since we have so limited resources, and this is a huge task from the beginning, so we have had to focus on just how to get the material in, and we have not done any tests or things like that. It's just me who sits on my computer and tries things out, but we have no proof of concept, we have nothing like that, but hopefully we are going to start to look into these things hopefully next year or something like that.
So about that stupid legislation, it is the legislation that you can't make it available, or that you can't force the material to be made available? In other words, like could a publication say, no, it's okay, you can archive my stuff and you can make it available? And if they did, could you make it available?
I'm not sure. I think it would be possible if they said that it was okay, possibly. The thing about this is that this legislation was the third attempt. They tried 2 attempts before that was stopped just because they talked about how we were able to make it available, and the years went past, and the legislator was really nervous that we has to start collecting, otherwise we are just missing out on so much material. So that's why they explicitly said in the legislation that we are not allowed to make this available until the government gives us further notice. That was just to go through the old copyright issues with getting the law passed.
So one suggestion, I did a spot check, in some of the publications we're archiving daily via the Wayback Machine. If you want to make a link to the Wayback Machine, that'd be cool.
Yeah. And regarding that is also so complicated for us that we have done the web harvesting since '97, 1 year after you, and no one uses our archives. I think we had a couple of years ago we had 6 users in the whole year, and that's because it's the same thing about that. It's only available in our premises, so we would love the fair use that you have here in the US, where you can make things available on the web, but we are not allowed to do that, and it's tragic.
I think Brewster wants to say something.
Something we can do together here.
Yeah.
We've got great tools. We've got collections. We're cloud services, all legal here. Maybe you can go and use and reinforce some of the services that are here.
Yeah, it would be great.
Go and donate the resulting file.
Yeah. I would love that, but I'm not a management person, so I have to bring that question back with me.
I just also want to say double plus good that she used the phrase social feed manager. Yeah. I was wondering how long it was going to be before that got raised. These cool tools. Do you write your data in work files?
We write our data in work files for the web harvesting, but in this electronic legal deposits, everything is in this METS container.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Tell them one thing about the copyright for public that you were talking about this morning.
Yeah.
I was just coaching. Yeah. Tell them about the copyright complications for you guys. That it's not a copyright for the publication. It's
okay. We discussed from the copyright discussions yesterday, we have a much more complicated situation in Sweden because copyrights for newspapers, for example, it's not the newspaper that holds the copyrights, it's each author, for each photographer. So if you want to clear an old newspaper, you have to clear the rights with each stakeholders, and since the copyright law is 70 years after each author has died and all his ancestors will inherit the copyright claims, you have thousands of stakeholders just to clear one newspaper, and that's it's impossible to make older newspapers available. So we don't have any cut-off times, so we have to do our own cut-off times. Like, we think that everything before the 1900s is okay to make available. It's fairly reasonable, but it's really, really problematic. We have got updated legislation that talks about collective licensing, but that is also very problematic since there hasn't been that much goodwill where they just give us a zero fee license, so we have to pay for everything, and it's really problematic. So we also have a great news archive where 18 million newspapers has been digitized, but a very small amount of that is public available. Everything is searchable online for everyone, but you cannot see the actual pages. Thank you so much for having us.
Okay, I will cop to the statement about the world's most advanced national news preservation system. Marketing, we have to go for that, but I think you're right up there. We could argue that. The next speaker, and thanks for coming so far. I want an extra round of applause for coming so far to join us. It's really great to have you. Our next speaker, Justin Heidemann, is a hacker and software engineer on the strike team at the New York Times, where he works on tidying up old software. He holds a degree in interactive media from the Minneapolis College of Art and Design.
Hello, everybody. Give me a moment here. Yep. Play. Okay. And it's not going to the right screen here.
Actually, Oh, that's the problem.
You have to turn off the mirror.
Yeah, but it's not even switching. Let me try that for a second. I lost the mouse.
Yeah, you know, it's probably on some other.
There it is.
Yeah. There. Display. Arrangements. And then mirror. Yeah.
Okay.
It was my fault.
It's all good. All right, I think.
How many nerds does it take to fix the computer?
There.
All right.
There. Is that
Yep, that's it. All right, beautiful. Beautiful. So I'm going to talk to you today about archiving web content at the New York Times. The Times has had a website for about 22 years, almost 22 years, and so we have a lot of stuff. My name is Justin Heidemann. As Ed said, I work on a team called the Strike Team. Now it's actually called the Condo Team at the New York Times. I worked there about 2 years. Before that, I worked at Minnesota Public Radio and the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, where I really tried to avoid working on any of our collection systems. So it's a little ironic that the Times I work on some of our archiving stuff. So this is Marie Kondo. She wrote a book called The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. This is her signature pose of joy that apparently she's very well known for. And so the team that I'm on is named after Marie. We are in the midst of a big website transition at the Times, and so the Kondo team is tasked with tidying up all the old portions of our website that have never been, haven't been dealt with in a long time. And so this is, so I'm going to talk about web archives. We also have another thing called Times Machine, which is a archive of all of our newspaper content that is on the web. I think my colleague Evan Sandhouse was at this conference last year and talked about Times Machine and sort of some of the technical underpinnings behind it. They're sort of interrelated projects, but web archives are a little distinct. So our archive right now is about 7.4 million pages, give or take. That number sort of fluctuates over time, tends to get a little bigger as we discover more and more pages that aren't in our archive yet. We could easily just let all these pages go 404. Most of them don't really make us any money. They get very little traffic because they're old, and in the news business, it's the new content that tends to get you page views and advertising dollars, and your subscribers come to your site for. But we don't think that's a good idea. We think we have a responsibility to do something with these pages. And so many of these pages are sort of the first draft of history, and we think they have historical value. And so I'm going to talk to you about some of the pages that we're actually talking about. So here's an example, the September 11th homepage. Obviously a pretty poignant page for anybody. Here's another example, an article from, I think this is 2009, about Obama and the surge. It's a very in-depth article, has lots of content in the sidebar. And there's lots of pages like that. And here's an example of pages that we're known for. This is a interactive where you can sort of balance the budget. So this is a hand-coded page that some of our developers in the newsroom and graphics people built. And these kinds of pages are very popular. These are all pages that are basically not maintained anymore, and we have to figure out what to do with them. So in order to understand our archiving, I'm going to take you through a brief history of some of the technology behind the New York Times website. So from 1996 to 2006, we had sort of 3 different versions of the design and the technical stuff behind our site. We call them now NYT1, NYT2, and NYT3. I'll project more, okay. When we started out with NYT1, we probably didn't call it NYT1, but we sort of numbered them over time. In 2006, we switched to a system called NYT4. NYT4 was the system that was up when our paywall first went into effect. This is an example article from the design of NYT4. And then in early 2014, we switched to something called NYT5. NYT5 was when we first got things like web fonts, and it really started to look a little bit more like the New York Times paper, had that feel. And very recently, we switched to a new system called VI. VI, it's not 6, just want to make that clear. And so this is this is the system that Condo is working on to clean up, and we're moving everything to VI. So when we move from one of these page content, one of these systems to another, it raises a question: what happens to the content that was published in the previous system? So our editors over time have gotten pretty good at molding the articles and the content to fit the page design that was available at the time when that content was published. So a page that was published in 2009 later transitions from NYT4 to NYT5. Aspects of the design of that page change, and some of the original editorial intent that was there gets lost. And so we think preserving some of that original intent is important. So let's take a look at some of those examples. So this is a page from, I think, 2011, and the version on my right, your left, has this interactive game in the template that a developer in our interactive team spent a lot of time putting together. And you can play with it and zap all the stuff on the page, and it really sort of helps to illustrate the discussion of addictive games and that kind of stuff. When it got transitioned from NYT4 to NYT5, that game was lost. A lot of intent disappeared. The text was still there, some of the images were still there, you could still read it, but some of the importance that that article originally conveyed disappeared. So here's another example, a slightly different example. This is a learning quiz that we published sometime. I don't actually know the exact dates on this one. But if you try to go to that URL today, you just get redirected to a learning landing page instead. Probably just because of expediency, somebody at some point put in some URL redirects that just captured that URL and sent you to this other page. This old page, and a lot of these old pages, are still available if you happen to be inside of our network and know how to put the right server URL and stuff in. So that's sort of what our archiving is doing. So those are all like bad situations, and we felt bad about them, but there was no like real driving force for us to do anything about them, because, as I said, they're not really like losing money because of that situation. So the thing that changed that for us is this. This is the cloud. It's just a big data center. I think this one is in Washington somewhere. But in 2018, the Times is going to has already started the process of, and we will be completing the process of moving all of our infrastructure from servers that we own in data centers to servers that we rent and in the cloud. There's a lot of reasons for that. It gives you more flexibility to do stuff faster. It turns out that running servers for peak load all the time, which might be like election night, you don't really need all that capacity on like a Tuesday morning. So we can save some money by running in the cloud. And so the cloud is sort of forcing us to deal with some of the legacy issues that we've been able to punt on for a long time. Those servers that we've been running for almost 20 years, or migrated through over those 20 years, now we have to sort of deal with that. And so NYT4 is the latest version of those servers that we have running and that we are going to clean up. So NYT4 is both a content framework and design of a page, but it's also the servers that contain all the output of our journalism over those previous 20 years. And so when we migrated from NYT4 to NYT5, we migrated some things, but not everything. And this is sort of what you see. So we when we looked at how we were going to do this archiving of stuff, we kind of luck out, because the people who built NYT4 were pretty smart, and they wrote static HTML to disk most of the time. And NYT4 is actually really kind of weird in that we invented our own programming language called context, and when we published a story, we would write a special context file and a HTML file to disk right next to each other. We serve and process the context file, but that HTML file is just sort of sitting there for us, waiting to do something with. So we sort of thought we could just, copy and paste that stuff into our archive, and it would work. In reality, though, it's a little bit more complicated. We have about 40,000 pages or so that have Flash on them. As we've been hearing about in this conference, Flash is going to stop working in 2020. Today, if you want to run Flash in your browser, you need a notarized letter from the Pope to make it happen. It's pretty complicated, so even if you visit some of our pages today that have Flash, you might not even realize they have Flash. But we wanted to at least keep the possibility open for the future that Flash might continue to work. SSL is another big thing, so making that green padlock in your browser green. When most of these pages were published in the past, we did not serve anything over SSL. We have been working very hard to get all of our sites on SSL, but a lot of these pages, for a variety of reasons, are complicated asset dependencies and things are difficult to get on SSL. So we're trying to upgrade as many of them as we can to SSL. We also want to get them off of our main domain, off of www.nytimes.com, so that we can turn on something called HSTS, which is a way to make SSL even more secure. And then HTTP2 is a newer protocol for transferring files for websites, and it sort of eliminates the need for a lot of hacks we did in the past to make our pages faster, and so we can eliminate, we think, a lot of weird domains and things like that. So one of the first things we started to do when we did this project, we started this project, was a content audit, just to sort of see. We knew what those pages were, but we didn't know what they all had. So we used some browser automation, a tool called Nightmare.js, and we could basically take those pages, load them up in a browser, export something called a HAR file, an HTTP archive. If you've ever opened the web inspector in Chrome and looked at the network tab, that's what a HAR file is. And so we could harvest information out of those HAR files and sort of determine how many pages had Flash, how many different domains were in use, how much of it was secure, just so we kind of knew what we were dealing with, because there's so many URLs, it's not really practical for us to go visit each one and figure it out by hand. So once we sort of had a conceptual idea of what we were dealing with, one of the first things we wanted to do was take screenshots of these pages. We said that if we screwed this up, like if our archiving process broke a bunch of stuff and didn't work for whatever reason, we wanted to have these screenshots as a way to preserve what the pages looked like before we did the archiving process, so that we could have that at least, if not the actual page, something close to it. So we figured out the URLs for about 720,000 pages, built a script, again, using browser automation, like a real browser, with Flash enabled, and captured those screenshots, stored them in Google Cloud Storage, and basically put them on the shelf and moved on. So as we looked at doing the actual archiving itself, we sort of came up with a couple conceptual ideas about how we were going to do it. We looked at a couple different options of how to do the archiving. One was creating work files like the Internet Archive does. We actually decided on a slightly different model. We decided that being able to edit the archive in the future if we discover an error was a pretty important thing to us, and we think we could keep all of our own static assets working in the future in perpetuity. So that was a decision we made pretty early on. All the images and style sheets and scripts and everything that our pages would depend on, we said we were going to commit to keeping those all working in perpetuity. So that's a little bit of a different track. So we built a tool we call the munger. Munge is kind of a pejorative term, mash until no good. In our case, we're mugging stuff because we're mashing it until good. But basically, it's a super fancy find and replace to go in, take weird domains out, pull out junk HTML, clean up some stuff, and then output files from one pile that's unarchived and kind of messy to another pile that's cleaned up and works in an archival fashion, doesn't have any server-side dependencies, that kind of thing. This is a diagram of how it works. One of the principles we decided was that we wanted to be able to rerun the archiving process in the future if we needed to. So we took a copy of all the files that were on our file system, put them in the cloud, and then we can run the munging, the archiving process, and output them to the cloud. And we can do it again and again and again if we need to. It just costs us a little bit of money in processing time and transfer. And that's the case that's in case we make some error in our script. We screw up and break a bunch of pages and we figure it out later. We can go back and fix that and rerun the process. So when we do this munging process, we actually we stick some metadata into the page itself. Our archive doesn't really have a big database of information. It's just a file system and in the cloud. And so we actually store information about each page in the page itself. So this is a JSON blob that we keep track of, like when the page was munged, and you might see in there's some stuff that says like has SSL, has mixed errors, something like that. That's because this is how we deal with the SSL issues I mentioned before. So we processed all the pages, and then we put them into our archive, and then again we use browser automation to go and try and view all those pages. And then we keep track of any errors that the browser throws. If there's any mixed content errors, the page has any flash, and then we keep track of that, and then we remunge the page again and put that information back into the page. And then when that page is displayed to somebody, we can use that to determine if that page should be served over SSL or not. So we have a lot of pages in the archive, and we can't really verify them all by hand to make sure they're all working. That's just not practical. So we came across a tool called Backstop.js. It's used typically front-end developers will use it to make sure that the designs look like it should. In our case, we're using it to compare reference to test versions of our pages. So you can see here, there's a reference version on my right, and then a test version in the middle, and then the difference between those versions on the far left, my left. And the purple is all the things that are broken. So in this case, the flash isn't there, and I can easily see the differences between those pages. And we basically selected a couple hundred pages, used this browser automation to generate these screenshots, and then we use that as a sampling to see how we're doing, how good our archiving process is. Does it make the flash work? Are other parts of the page broken or not? So we had wanted to show you the archive here today, but it's not quite ready yet. So it will be coming soon at a URL that we will be able to advertise to you. One of the things that we are working on is figuring out how people are going to discover this archive. We have about 10,000 pages that are published today that we still serve in this old format, and those will be some of the first pages that we will expose people to from our live site to this archive. And then we're figuring out how this is going to integrate with our paywall system, who this is actually going to be available to in the future, but there's a lot to do yet. That's what I've got.
Hi, thanks for your presentation and thank you for doing this work. I have two questions. I think one of the slides said that you decided to remove the ads. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, from a journalism historian kind of perspective, my colleagues back at the University of Minnesota would be sad about that, because that's one of the things that's important for people that are trying to do historical research.
Sure.
Is there any chance that that decision could be revisited? I mean, I know that everybody sees a different ad because of the personalization. Is that one of the reasons why you did it?
Well, we did it mostly because the ads didn't work in most of the pages already anyway.
Okay.
If you look in, once this is live, if you look in some of the screenshots, there will be ads in them. But for a lot of the pages, the ad system that we had back when the page was originally published is no longer available. We've changed. I'm sure you know how quickly the advertising world changes. So we've changed ad technology many times since 2007, for instance, and so there just already were no ads. There might be a script that's running and trying to put ads into the page, and it's just broken.
Okay. The other thing is that when we were working on our project, we talked to someone at the New York Times who said that there was no capture of the first day that the website launched in 1995, and the first capture anybody had was the Wayback Machine from 11 months later. But talking to some folks at the conference here, they said, that's not necessarily true. We found some early stuff. So can you confirm the rumor that there's actually some captures of the early days of the website?
I don't think we have the earliest version of the page that you're probably thinking of. If you guys know where it is, I would love to, because I poked around in the archive and tried to find it. I think we have pages from around that era, but not back to 1990. I think it's January 14th, 1995 or 1996.
Yeah.
So we don't have that one.
Okay, so it still is that the Wayback Machine's capture on November of that year is maybe the only thing you've got.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, but thanks to the Wayback Machine.
Are you going to keep your URL stable? Can you make it so that all the past links to the New York Times will still continue to work? Or are they going to be this sort of archived New York Times slash?
So what's happening is that, say you have a link to an article from 2006. And right now it might go to a page that looks like this one, but it doesn't have that this is an archived page thing at the top. What will happen in the future is that you will see the URL will still continue to work. It's going to be it's going to be the new design that we talked about, the Project Vi design, but we're going to put a link on there that says, "Hey, this is different than how it was originally published. Click here to view the original version," which will take you into the archive. So. Yeah.
So for pages of the New York Times itself, you would go to the New York Times machine, the one that you cited at the beginning, and that would give you the front page or the pages of the New York Times. How far back?
The Times machine? That goes back to 1851.
Okay. So that's the full archive of the print copy.
Yes, don't quote me on this. I don't think everything is in there yet, but there are plans to eventually have all issues of the New York Times in there and all articles that we've ever published to be available.
Okay, thank you.
A request from the Peanut Gallery. New York Times puts all of these random sort of things on the turds on the end of the URL to go and track
for the
all
gateway
sorts of
and all that stuff. Yeah.
Please get rid of them. It makes it just much more. It's much more difficult to anchor to an article because there's so many variations in the URL, and you have to then code for New York Times specially and for a different era. So if you have any, just get rid of it. Put it in the header. Put it someplace else. Just don't turd up the URL.
Well, I don't know that I have power to fix all that, but I think most people at the Times would agree with you, and I think, and again, don't quote me on this, I think that is the long-term plan. Nobody likes that, but it's just sort of some of the realities of how to make our business model work with the paywall and all that kind of stuff.
So I'm super interested in the issue of archiving interactives. So you talked a little bit about how, for example, like Flash is an issue, but one thing I'm also curious about is JavaScript. So if you're writing interactives that are using JavaScript in 2005, engines of today are completely different, and in fact it might be harder to find a browser running like an older version of JavaScript than it is to just install Flash. So do y'all have any strategies for dealing with older versions of JavaScript, outdated JavaScript libraries, or like JavaScript dependencies in general?
We typically try to link to our own versions of JavaScript libraries so that like we're not linking to jQuery from some CDN that may or may not be there in the future. I'm not on the interactive team, but generally we try to keep our pages such that the first level of dependencies are kind of in the page. But I don't know that there's any specific, I mean, it sort of depends on how browser technology evolves in that regard. Pages that were built in 2005 with JavaScript that still exists, as long as we keep those files around and working, should still work today for the most part. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I was wondering about data entry. Last time I checked in on the Times, they were still using the legacy Scoop as a CMS. Is that, and then a bunch of people are, like all the blogs were entered on WordPress, and I think the interactive team had a whole nother method. Have you consolidated the CMS yet, or is that still many CMSs?
Scoop is our CMS still. We still run some WordPress. That is actually another project of we're getting rid of WordPress or ratcheting down the number of things that we have on WordPress. And there are other CMSs, but they all kind of feed into Scoop. All right, I think it's time for lunch. Can I make that declaration? All right.
All right, so we got a lunch plan worked out here. So everyone signed up for those sheets downstairs, yeah? If you haven't, you're on your own. No, if you haven't, find me and I'll tell you where to go. Okay, so basically, so we need to have a designated. Well, let's go downstairs to the foyer, and we'll go outside. How many people have signed up for the Celestial Flame? There's 12 people. So I'm going to be going there. I don't have the list of the restaurants. Caitlin, any ideas about